What I want to do in this video is think about the difference between the short-term and the long-term supply. So let's say in the very short term, if you wanted to get the person in your town who owns a 2000 Honda Civic to part with their Honda Civic, and this person likes it the least, for that very first in a given day, you're going to have to spend about $2,500. Now to get the next person to part with their Honda Civic, they might like it a little bit more, you'd have to spend a little bit more, and so on and so forth. And so we'll call this the short-term supply curve. The short-term supply curve. And this demand curve looks like a demand curve for many things. The very first unit, the person will get a high marginal benefit, and then as we had more and more incremental units, you have lower marginal benefit for those units. Or another way of thinking about it, at a very high price, the demand for Honda Civics, 2000 Honda Civics, will be low, or the quantity demanded will be low, and at a very low price, the quantity demanded will be very high. And another way of looking at the short-term supply, at a low price, the quantity supplied will be low, and at a high price, the quantity supplied would be high. Now let me give you some more information. Let's say that this is our town right over here, T for our town, and there are some neighboring towns. So that's town A, this is town B, this is town C, and this is town D. And let's say that all of them have, including our town right now, before I change anything, they all have an equilibrium price of $5,000 per used Honda Civic. And I'm making this video in 2012, and that's about what the Blue Book value of a used 2000 Honda Civic is. And we see that this is even the case in our town right over there. Equilibrium price of $5,000 and equilibrium quantity of about 22 Civics per day. But given that all of the towns have an equilibrium price of $5,000, let's think about what the long-term supply curve for Honda Civics in our town might look like. And the reason why I'm thinking about other towns is because we can always trade, we can always move Honda Civics very easily between towns. These might be only 10 or 50 miles away. So not a difficult thing. So what happens if in our town, specifically, not in the other towns, just in our town, the price for Honda Civics were to go at all below $5,000? So now we're thinking about the long term. I just talked about the short term. Now let's think about the long term. In the long term, if the price went below $5,000 in our town, people will catch wind of it. They'll hear that you can actually sell your Civics for $5,000 in other towns, and no one will want to actually supply Honda Civics in our town for $5,000. They'll just export them out. They'll export them out to neighboring towns where they can get more money for them. So in the long term, if the price were to be anything lower than $5,000, the quantity in our town would get pretty close to zero. Likewise, if the price in our town went even slightly higher than $5,000, then all of a sudden it becomes an incentive for people in the other towns. Instead of selling their car in their town for $5,000, they'd want to drive a couple of miles to our town and sell it. And so if the equilibrium, or if the price were to become slightly higher than $5,000, then all of a sudden you would have a huge supply. A lot of Civics would be coming into town. So our long-term supply curve would look something like this. In a lot of books, I drew it as very slightly upward sloping. In many books, they'll just be purist about it, and they'll just do a horizontal, perfectly elastic curve. And this is a reminder. What does elasticity mean? With a very, very small change in, or perfectly elastic means a very small change in price, you have an infinite change in quantity. So something is very elastic if a very small change in price leads to a very large change in quantity. And so this is approaching perfect elasticity, or you could almost say that the absolute value of the elasticity is approaching, the elasticity of supply here is approaching infinity. And this is interesting because now we can do an interesting thought experiment. Let's say, so this is our short-term supply, and this is our long-term supply. What happens over many days when people catch wind of the prices in neighboring towns, and there's some time for people to move cars from one town to another. Let's say in our town, the most fashionable person in our town just traded in their Rolls Royce, and they bought themselves a 2000 Honda Civic. And they are very proud about this, and they're flaunting it around town, their 2000 Honda Civic. It gets shown in all of the magazines, the local magazines. This is happening just in our town, not in the neighboring towns. And all of a sudden, just in our town, it becomes very trendy and very fashionable to have a used 2000 Honda Civic. And this is only happening This is only happening in our town, not in the other towns. So the other towns, their equilibrium prices aren't changed. So we're not changing this long-term supply curve at all. So what's going to happen? Well, because everyone wants a 2000 Honda Civic now, the preferences have changed. At any given price, more 2000 Honda Civics will be demanded. So the demand will increase. The demand will increase. So the new demand curve will look something like this. It will shift to the right. So in the short term, before any Honda Civics have time to be shipped here, before anyone in the other towns catch wind of the new equilibrium price, in the short term, the equilibrium price will move up. And that makes sense because people will be eager and they'll just buy whatever's in town. So the equilibrium price will move up to $5,500 per Civic, and the equilibrium quantity will go up. Though many of the people who have them, maybe they're willing to sell part with it now. And you have more people now, more of the moneyed, trendy people who are willing to pay for it now. But what's going to happen in the long term? People in the neighboring towns are going to catch wind that you can sell your Honda Civics not for $5,000, but for $5,500 because for some strange reason, it's a very trendy car in this town right over here. So over the long term, the price is going to go back to where the new demand curve intersects with the long-term supply curve. So over time, it's going to shift back to this point right over here, to the long-term supply. And so over time, the price is going to go to $5,000, and the quantity sold is just going to be much higher. And so that's because, and that makes complete common sense. It's a very fashionable car in this town, and so people are going to start importing. And it didn't become all of a sudden fashionable in the other towns, and now people will be importing into this town.